Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and welcome to Episode 39 of This Week in FCPA, the Super Bowl edition. In this episode, Jay Rosen and I look at the recent New England stunning win over Atlanta in Super Bowl 51 held here in Houston, Texas, and we mine it for some compliance lessons, particularly around data forecasting, use of data, risk management, planning, and preparation, and risk-based monitoring. We have a lot of fun with this episode. If you're a football fan, you'll enjoy it. And if you're not a football fan, I think you'll get a lot of lessons and certainly look at things perhaps in a different way. The episode comes in at just over 25 minutes. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Translations, Jay Rosen. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and welcome to This Week in FCPA, the Super Bowl edition. As always, I'm joined by my cohort, Mr. Translations himself, Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. We're going to do two of the most favorite things that I enjoy to talk about. We're going to talk about ethics and compliance. We're going to talk about football. So I look forward to chatting for the next half an hour or so. I think we have some very interesting insights to share.
So for those who are not aware, the Super Bowl was last Sunday. Breaking news here from This Week in FCPA. And it was, in my mind, probably the best Super Bowl ever. But what struck me, Jay, was the lessons that a compliance practitioner could get out of what happened. So we have Tom Brady with now, I think it's 5 times he's hosted the championship trophy. And if that's Otto Graham had 6, although that includes his 4 from the All-American Football Conference to go with his 2 NFL championships. So whether you think he's number 2 on the all-time list or in the modern era number 1, he is certainly the man, and the performance he put on was truly one for the ages. For the Atlanta fans who may be listening to this podcast, having watched the Oilers blow a 35-3 middle third quarter lead in a playoff game, I feel your pain. The only thing I can say is it wasn't a Super Bowl, but for those of you who felt like you wanted to burn your Atlanta Falcons jersey, I certainly understand it. But Jay, there were a couple of things that really struck me about the game and its debrief. So about 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter, my 84-year-old mother called me, who was watching the game, and she said something along the lines of the following. You know, Atlanta has put on a textbook example of how to win a Super Bowl. She just loved the Atlanta offense, their strategy, their game plan, the speed of their defense, and everything they had done. And that she was thinking about going to bed. I said, well, Mom, you know, maybe you want to just wait a little bit longer. It's Tom Brady, and who knows what can happen. Well, it turned out around the time she called me, Atlanta had a 99.7% chance of winning the game. If you want to flip that around, New England had a 0.03 chance of winning the game. Now, we've certainly learned over the past 8 months or so that forecasting is certainly not a science. It may not even be an art, given what happened for the English forecasters in Brexit and the U.S. forecasters for the U.S. presidential election. But it got me to think, Jay, one of the things you and I talk about is the use of data in a compliance program and how compliance officers need to be looking at data to spot trends. Well, what happens if the information you look at says that you, with 8 minutes left in a game, have a 99.7% chance of winning, and then you act accordingly, and you have your owner and his wife come down to the sideline and start dancing away in anticipation of hoisting the Super Bowl trophy from the commish? And how bad you're going to look as an owner over those next 8 minutes if that 0.03% chance occurs. But I guess the thing that really struck me was that the percentage chance of winning did not take into account enough variable factors or even subjective factors. And I don't want to say it's the heart of a champion. It's, oh, he was Tom Brady and never say die. There were some really tangible reasons that New England was able to come back. I've heard commentators say they won 8, it's the equivalent of winning 8 coin flips in a row, but they still won them. And but more to the point, luck occurs when preparation meets opportunity. And if you don't prepare for that type of situation, when the opportunity arises, those lucky 8 coin flips will mean very little to you. So this number of 99.7% chance obviously did not take into account the fact that the Atlanta defense had been on the field much longer than the Patriot defense, simply because Atlanta was so efficient in scoring its first 35 points, and that, 28 points, and that the defense was tuckered out. They were tired out. I don't want to say they were out of condition, but they couldn't keep up with the Patriots that last 8 minutes. It also didn't seem to take into account that changes could be made by a professional coaching staff. Certainly Bill Belichick can adapt on the fly. But in the Super Bowl, you have a halftime that lasts 1 hour and 15 minutes. And that's a lot of time to make adjustments and changes. And Belichick was able to, and his coaching staff was able to make changes which allowed them to adapt during the second half of the game. Obviously, that number did not take into account the Tom Brady-ness of Tom Brady. He is one of the greatest of all time at the quarterback position, if not the greatest, and he could still read a defense and execute as well as anyone in the National Football League. And so that last 8 or 10 minutes was as Brady-ness as one could be. Now, I recognize that when you have catches such as the Julian Edelman catch, you can call that luck. But once again, if I revert back to my maxim that when preparation meets opportunity, luck occurs. If you have a professional wide receiver who practices a variety of catches and works on his eye-hand coordination, that person can make what seem to be lucky catches. And I know it pains you for me to bring up the David Tyree catch, but I didn't find Edelman's catch to be any more or less lucky than the Tyree catch, who pinned a football against his helmet while falling down with a defensive back on top of him. So, or the Julio Jones catch on the sideline that we'll get to in a minute was no more luck either. So it's a long-winded way of saying what data should you be looking at? What's the right analysis to use? And are you, as a chief compliance officer, looking at the right data? So I pontificated for quite a while there. What are some of your thoughts?
So I think one of the things to consider, they used some new technology in the game, which was kind of like a 360-degree view. And they couldn't do it live, but they could go back in to look at a play, to look at how somebody got so open. And I think one of the things that I find interesting is when they're in the middle of this game, Tom, and they're 8 minutes left, and they have that 99.7% chance to win. At that moment, they don't know what is the correct data they should be looking at, right? And so, Belichick, not only did Belichick make changes during halftime, but they started making changes in the middle of the first quarter and the beginning of the second quarter because, Atlanta took away the middle of the field. They couldn't get any of these crossing routes going, and they couldn't get the ball to Edelman. So I guess one of the questions that we have is, even if you think you're doing everything right, you're Atlanta, you're efficient, you're scoring. What they were maybe not considering was, well, how do we eat some of this clock off, and how do we keep Brady from, exhibiting his Bradiness? So what do we say to a CCO out there or somebody? What are the right metrics that you look at, and how can you figure out before your defense gets too tired out there and is worn down by somebody who is a bad actor? How do you keep your defense in shape? How do you keep yourself with the proper perspective? And how can we take this, horrific collapse from an Atlanta perspective, but also from the New England perspective, is they played until the last bell. They played 60 minutes and then some more, and they were willing to put in the effort that it took to win.
So let me take another point, Jay, that really struck me. And that involves the aforementioned incredible Julio Jones catch. And it really was an incredible catch along the sidelines. I don't know how he got his feet down, but he did. Certainly not a mere mortal play. So if I could set the setting a little bit, Atlanta has the ball. They're on their 20 on New England's 23. They've got a fresh set of downs. There's 6:38 left in the game. At that point, they were up by 8 points. And if Atlanta kicks a field goal, they go up by 11. Obviously, a two-score game, whether or not you count 8 points as a one or a two-score game. Atlanta then just completely went off the rails. They ran a play into the middle of the line and didn't get any yardage. Then they attempted a pass where the Atlanta quarterback, Matty Ice himself, Matt Ryan, was sacked for about a 10-yard loss. Then the next play, they sustained a holding penalty, which took them another 10 yards back. And then finally, on the final third down, they threw an incomplete pass. The upshot was that Atlanta had to punt, and Tom Brady did what Tom Brady always does when he has the ball last. He drives down the field and scores to either tie or win. And the score included yet another 2-point conversion. So that really led me to think about, or at least contemplate, a failure of planning by Atlanta. Because it was clear the commentators, even at the time, were questioning the play calling. One, why are you risking or being more risky by trying to throw the ball? Two, you run zero or very little time off the clock, thereby giving Tom Brady time to demonstrate his Tom Bradiness and do what he always does, which is drive down and score. And why were they throwing the ball like that? Why did they make those two plays? So, number one, Ryan should not have sustained that sack at any cost. But two, then the follow-up play was the disastrous holding call on this follow-up pass. And it led me to think about your failure of planning. Why did Atlanta in that crucial situation seem to completely fail planning? Or their play calling? Had they not planned for that situation? Was it that they had been so successful at throwing a ball previously, they felt like it was less of a risk than to run the ball? It really led me to think about why you need to plan for those types of situations. Atlanta should have had a protocol ready so that they weren't trying to make things up on the fly. You've got plenty of coaches up in the booth who can plan for that. If you want to flip that over to the CCO world, if a call comes into the hotline that really is the mother lode of FCPA violations, do you have an investigation protocol in place? Do you have an elevation or an escalation protocol in place? How do you do these things? Have they talked to their data translator partner to have a protocol ready to start the process? All of those things are important, because when you try to do these things on the fly under the pressure of a Super Bowl, you're more liable to make mistakes. And that mistakes, or those series of mistakes by Atlanta on that play and series of plays, although in a football game you can rarely point to one series that is the turning point or at least led to a loss, I think you can certainly point to that series of blown play calling by Kyle Shanahan, the former offensive coordinator of Atlanta, going forward. And if you have planned and have a process in place, you're less liable to make those sort of rushed mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If you look at the touchdown, the first touchdown they scored in the fourth quarter when they went for a 2-point conversion, it's a play that they used maybe 6 or 7 years ago with Kevin Falk, and it's a direct snap to the running back, and Brady kind of throws his hands up in the air and makes it look like he's lost the ball. So that's a play that Belichick has had in his back pocket from at least, the turn of the century when the Pats won 3 times within a 4-year time frame. So I think that also augurs what you were saying, Tom, that Belichick always has a plan for everything. So if they're going to have to run a 2-point play, they're going to take a plan that they've used for the last 10 years, and they're going to do it. And unless you've studied them very well, you're not going to be prepared for it. So, to your point, and what we talk about a lot of times in investigations is if something goes wrong, you don't want to have to start calling somebody who's going to help you forensically gather your data, or you don't want to start calling people to help you with the document review, or you don't want to go to Google and type in translations companies. So this is, I think where you're going, that you need to be prepared for any situation. You need to think that something could go wrong in X jurisdiction. And if it does, how do you have that, that plan in place to know who those numbers are and who those people are to call? And then, how do you rally your troops together? I think one of the favorite things that Brady loves to do is he loves to be in the game at the end with the victory formation. And going back up to that 8-minute mark, if Atlanta had some different play calling and the running game was successful, so if they had gone to take more time off the clock, instead of running those pass plays, they may have gotten themselves closer to that victory formation or gotten themselves closer to kick a field goal with more certainty.
So anything really from your perspective that you could tie back into the CCO or compliance and ethics?
Well, I think, what the CCO needs to think about is this game is 60 minutes long, right? And to some people, it's more about the quick score, right? It's more about getting out a code of conduct, or it's more about showing your stats from the hotline. And if nobody's calling in, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? So I think we, as a community in ethics and compliance, have to start looking at this situation maybe from a different perspective, that you got to play 60 minutes. You got to play all 4 quarters. And one of the things that we both noticed here in this game is that Atlanta got off to such a high-flying start that they never considered, how do we slow this game down, and how do we make the game a game that we can play to our strengths and win. And regardless of how much money or resources your department has, if you can kind of look at the ethics and compliance issues through that lens about that we have the game that we're playing this year is 52 weeks long. So how do we get the message? How do we do the testing? How do we get compliance? And how do we build that in the day-to-day rhythms and the jobs that each person in our company does? And then if everybody does their job and just their job, then maybe our companies will be in better shape to be successful in rooting out corruption.
There's one other thing that I've really been impressed with about the Patriots for many years. It doesn't get as much press as I think really should. And I'm not sure if it really would tie to risk assessment or risk-based monitoring, but it's the following, Jay. Bill Belichick obviously was not successful in his coaching career at Cleveland Browns as their head coach. Went back to work under Bill Parcells as an assistant, and then became the head coach of New England. And at New England, beginning at Cleveland, but finishing or really realizing his goal at New England was to create a player evaluation system that was very sophisticated, took into account multiple factors, multiple algorithms, a lot of data. And it has allowed he and the Patriots to bring in players that were not well known, were not successful in other systems, or indeed had great talent yet for some reason were considered problem players. And Randy Moss obviously is the best example. Or discard players, trade players, cut players who no longer fit the needs of the organization. And it's really this. Belichick is often lauded for being able to plug anyone in and win a game, or to quote Bum Phillips about Don Shula, he can take hisns and beat urines, or take urines and beat hisns. It's not quite that simple. It is that he has a talent, he is evaluated or risk ranked the talent, and knows how to plug in that talent into his system and can continue to do so, even when you lose arguably your best player, Rob Gronkowski, if it's not Brady, for most of the end of the season and certainly the Super Bowl, still have the success that he has had, Belichick has had since he took over at the Patriots. And this is really a building block of execution. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And every compliance officer needs to understand that it's not all glamorous. A lot of it is spade work. And if you do that spade work, if something pops up and you are risk evaluating or risk monitoring or risk ranking or risk assessing, it will give you information to be able to plug in the right solution when the time comes.
I think that's a great point, Tom. And, you know, the other thing that you need to do is whether or not you have that protocol, you still have to realize that you may have to audible and you may have to change your plan in midstream. And that's, I think, another hallmark of Belichick and his staff is, you know, they're really good about making in-game adjustments. And as I said earlier, it wasn't just a halftime adjustment, but it was, you know, within the first and second quarter that he realized that their offensive plan wasn't going to work. Another thing that Belichick is all about is ball control. And when LeGarrette Blount had that fumble, he did not play many more plays. He was spending most of his time commentating on the sidelines and getting picked up by the NFL mics. But, you know, there are certain rules that Belichick plays by, and one of the things is ball control. And, you know, he knows that the less turnovers you have, the higher percentage you have of winning the game. And, you know, I think those are also lessons for the compliance officers about how do you limit turnovers? How do you put your players in the best position to succeed? And then should the game change on you, is your team cross-trained and do you have a proper B and C plan? And, I guess the other thing that you and I have spoken about in the past is New England has done this now in the early 2000s, and now they've done it 15 years later to win 2 championships in 3 years. So within the salary cap era, that is just an incredible achievement, and he really should be lauded for that as well.
The only thing I would disagree with you on, Jay, is I wouldn't limit it to the salary cap era. The sustained greatness over the past 15 years, or now 17 years, 16 years by the Patriots, is really not something we have seen from any one team. We have certainly had great teams from the 30s, the New York Giants, from the 40s, the Chicago Bears, the aforementioned Cleveland Browns, Detroit Lions, from the 50s, the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, from the 60s, we had the Green Bay Packers and 5 NFL championships in one decade. 70s, as much as it pains me to say it, was Pittsburgh over my Dallas Cowboys. In the 80s, we had the run of San Francisco and then New York Giants equally well. Up and down in the 90s with the Broncos finally coming through. But for this century, you can't point to much better than the Patriots and their sustained run of greatness. So, kudos to them. Congrats to Brady. I really appreciated the way they handled the commish. I love the fact that my fellow Houstonians at the game just gave him a rounding Bronx cheer when he was trying to announce the trophy. So a lot of sweet payback there.
So, and I think if you look at the Vegas sports books already, they are favored to win or at least make it to Super Bowl 52. So I think that just shows the continuity. And I guess the one question, not the one question, but the thing I have for you is, how come other teams are not able to find like this, the crossing wide receiver? You could see that, like, Wes Welker, when he played for the Dolphins, he was killing the Patriots. And I'm sure Belichick said, I'd rather have this guy on my side. That's 2 more opportunities to win in division. But the prototypical, tiny wide receiver, the Danny Amendolas, the Julian Edelmans, why does New England seem to be the only team that has success with that? I don't really see other teams doing that. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think part of it is the greatness and genius of Belichick, but it's this iteration of Belichick. Remember, he was an abject failure at Cleveland, and he went back in to work for one of the true masters, Bill Parcells. So that's part of it. Part of it is certainly Tom Brady, if not the greatest quarterback, one of the greatest quarterbacks. But there's one other factor we haven't really talked about, and that is the owner, Robert Kraft. And all of the teams, a lot of the teams have owners that meddle in, get involved, and they are very Jerry Jones, my Cowboys, Jerry Jones. We're never going to win a Super Bowl as long as Jerry Jones is meddling away. But you have a ownership that has set the tone at the top, from the owner on down to not just success, but excellence in execution, and that leads to success. So kudos to Robert Kraft for putting it all together, having the wisdom to stand back and let the football coach football and let him take care of the business side of things.
So I guess to talk about the big man himself, it's more than just buying the groceries, right? You have to get that tone at the top so correct that, it's really been codified now as the Patriot way. And, sometimes it doesn't work. It didn't work with Albert Hainsworth. It didn't work with Marvin Harrison came in and couldn't make it work. So it takes a unique individual.
Tim Tebow.
And I think, yeah, well, I don't even know if he got a fair shake. I think Belichick might have brought him in just to see if there was going to be something different. But there's no way that you needed to carry a backup quarterback to run what's that package called that Miami ran against against New England and really
the Wildcat package.
The Wildcat, yeah. So you don't need Tim Tebow around to run the Wildcat when you got Julian Edelman who can do it. So I think that was just more Bill being the mad scientist doing a little bit of tinkering. But, at the end of the day, as what you said, Tebow was not the right fit either. But I think Belichick, whereas Parcells was really a getting in your head kind of guy, and he could motivate different people, and he had different rules for different people. I think people have really bought into the fact that Belichick has the answers, and if you're willing to commit 365 days a year, and you're willing to work within the system, and if you are the best player that week, you will make the lineup on Sunday, and you will get to contribute. And as the next man up type of thing, that's really what's happened. And I think when people at the end of at the end of Brady's career, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5 more years, when he gets into that Hall of Fame, they're going to look at his supporting cast and the people that he's thrown touchdowns to. I mean, with the exception of having somebody like Randy Moss, none of these other players, I think, that have been on the team will be in the Hall of Fame with Brady. So he's really going to be it's going to be quite an accomplishment for him when he gets enshrined in Canton.
Well, Jay, this has been a lot of fun going through the Super Bowl and looking at it from some compliance angles and perspectives. Any final thoughts for our listeners this week?
No, I just really, I guess you told the story about I love it that your 84-year-old mom said that, Atlanta executed flawlessly and she was really ready to go to bed. My situation from watching the Super Bowl was I had some friends coming and I tried to be good-natured and I put the game on delay and waited for them. And then Mrs. Translation doesn't really like the Super Bowl so much unless the Redskins are playing in it, but she does like to watch the commercials. So as we got down towards the overtime period, we were about 30 or 40 minutes behind in real time. And I started to get really worried because I hadn't gotten a text from you or from Jim Moore or anyone else. And I looked over to Rebecca and I said, we're going to lose this game, right? And she, being Mrs. Translation, had looked up the score already. And she gave my hand a little squeeze and looked at me with her knowing eyes saying, I think you're going to be okay. So that's my one story. But I still I'm going to have to go back and watch it several more times because I still just do not believe that improbable chain of events. But I am excited and ecstatic, and I'm not even worried about when pitchers and catchers report because this is going to keep me happy for a long time.
Well, then I guess we should give our audience the denouement with my mother, which was when I called her the Monday after the Super Bowl to say, I hope you didn't turn off the television. She said, no, you were right. I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't. So Mom got to see the whole thing.
Well, the best part is when Mom says you're right. That doesn't do fine.
All right, Jay. Well, till next week, this has been This Week in FCPA.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate you indulging us in our football chatter, and it's always fun to talk ethics and compliance. So thanks for joining us to discuss the week in FCPA that was.
This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you again for listening to This Week in FCPA. If you have any questions you'd like to pose to Jay or I, please shoot us an email We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you've listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate if you would rate us. It would not only help our rankings, but help get the message out of This Week in FCPA. This is Tom Fox. I hope you'll join us next week as we explore the issues around FCPA, compliance, and ethics for the week that will be. Thank you again.